The Cowboy's spurs had stopped jingling 3 hours ago, when Preston Garrett dismounted his horse and carried Teresa Sullivan through the doorway of the small cabin she'd rented at the edge of Williamsburg, Virginia. Both of them soaked to the bone from the October storm that had caught them on the road between her family's burned homestead and town. Teresa hadn't expected to ever see another kind face after the raiders had come through 2 days prior, taking everything her family owned before setting fire to the modest farmhouse her father had built with his own hands 15 years ago when they'd first settled in Virginia. Her parents were visiting her married sister in Richmond, thank God, but Teresa had stayed behind to tend the animals and maintain the property. She'd been in the barn when the men came, had hidden in the hay loft with her hand pressed over her mouth to keep from screaming as they ransacked the house and lit the torches. When they finally rode away, whooping and firing their guns into the air, she'd climbed down to find everything she'd ever known reduced to ash and ember. She'd started walking toward town at dawn the next morning with nothing but the clothes on her back and her mother's silver locket around her neck. The storm had rolled in fast, the kind of violent autumn tempest that turned the Virginia roads into rivers of mud. She'd been stumbling along, half blind from the rain, when the cowboy appeared out of the gray curtain of water like some kind of answer to a prayer she hadn't known she was praying. He'd been leading his horse, a sturdy buckskin gelding, and when he'd seen her struggling through the mud, he'd immediately offered his assistance. His name was Preston Garrett, he'd told her, and he'd been traveling through Virginia on his way back to Texas after delivering a herd of cattle to a buyer in Maryland. His drawl was pure southern warmth, and his eyes, even through the driving rain, had held genuine concern. "Madam, you cannot stay out in this weather," he'd said, his voice raised to be heard over the storm. "There is a town not 3 miles ahead. Let me help you." She'd been too exhausted and cold to refuse. He'd lifted her onto his horse and led them both through the storm, walking through the mud himself rather than making the horse carry double weight in such conditions. When they'd reached Williamsburg, he'd helped her secure the cabin, paid for a week's rent with his own money despite her weak protests, and brought her inside. Now she sat wrapped in a blanket by the small fireplace, watching the flames dance while Preston hung their wet coats near the hearth. The cabin was simple, just one room with a bed, a table, 2 chairs, and the fireplace, but it was dry and warm and felt like a palace compared to the cold and wet she'd endured. "You should rest," Preston said, his back still to her as he adjusted the coats. "I will sleep outside with Dusty once the storm passes." Dusty was his horse, she'd learned during their rain-soaked journey. "You cannot sleep outside in this weather," Teresa protested, her voice hoarse from exhaustion. "You will catch your death." He turned to look at her then, and she got her first real look at him in proper light. He was tall, easily over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the lean, muscular build of a man who'd spent his life working hard. His hair was dark brown, almost black, and fell in damp waves to his collar. His face was weathered but handsome, with strong features and eyes the color of warm honey. She guessed he was perhaps 25 or 26, only a few years older than her own 22 years. "I have slept in worse conditions, Miss Sullivan," he said with a small smile. "I assure you I will be fine." "The storm is not letting up," she said, glancing toward the window where rain still pounded against the glass. "Please, you paid for this cabin. The least I can do is share the space. You can have the bed, I will sleep in the chair." "Absolutely not," he said firmly. "You have been through an ordeal. You need proper rest." They argued back and forth for several minutes before finally agreeing that he would sleep on the floor near the fire while she took the bed. It wasn't ideal, but it was better than him trying to shelter in a stable during such a violent storm. Teresa changed into a dry nightgown she'd found in the cabin's small trunk, likely left by a previous tenant, while Preston politely turned his back and busied himself with stoking the fire. When she was settled in the bed, he made himself as comfortable as possible on the hard floor with his saddle bag as a pillow and his mostly dry bedroll as a blanket. "Mr. Garrett," she said softly into the darkness after he'd put out the lamp. "Yes, Miss Sullivan. Thank you for everything. I do not know what I would have done if you had not come along." "No thanks necessary," he replied. "Any decent person would have done the same." But Teresa knew that wasn't true. She'd seen enough of the world to know that kindness like his was rare, especially from a stranger who had nothing to gain from helping her. She lay awake for a long time, listening to the storm rage outside and the crackling of the fire, thinking about everything she'd lost and everything that lay ahead. She'd need to send word to her parents in Richmond, find work, figure out how to rebuild her life from nothing. The tasks ahead seemed insurmountable. At some point, exhaustion finally claimed her, and she fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. When she woke, pale morning light was filtering through the window. The storm had passed, leaving behind a clear October sky. She sat up, expecting to find Preston gone, having left at first light as she assumed any traveling cowboy would. But he was still there, crouched by the fireplace, coaxing the embers back to life. He'd clearly already been out because there was a small bundle on the table, wrapped in brown paper. He must have heard her stirring because he turned and offered her a warm smile. "Good morning, Miss Sullivan. I hope you slept well." "I did, thank you," she said, confused and touched that he was still there. "I thought you would have left already. You said you were traveling back to Texas." "I have been thinking about that," he said, standing up and brushing his hands on his trousers. "My plans are not urgent. No one is waiting for me in Texas, and I have enough money to stay in Virginia for a while if I choose to. I thought perhaps you could use some help getting situated. Sending word to your family, finding work, that sort of thing." Teresa felt her eyes begin to burn with tears. "Why would you do that for a stranger?" Preston was quiet for a moment, seeming to consider his words carefully. "I lost my own family 5 years ago," he said finally. "Different circumstances than yours. Cholera outbreak took my parents and my younger sister. I was 21, on my own for the first time, and it was the loneliest I have ever felt. A stranger helped me then, an old rancher who gave me work and a place to stay until I got my bearings. He told me that kindness is meant to be passed along, not paid back, so I am passing it along to you." Teresa climbed out of bed, pulling the blanket around her shoulders, and crossed to where he stood. Without thinking, she reached out and took his hand. "I do not know how to thank you." His hand was warm and calloused, strong but gentle as it closed around hers. "You do not need to thank me. Just accept the help." They stood like that for a moment, hands clasped, something unspoken passing between them. Then Preston cleared his throat and gestured to the bundle on the table. "I went into town early this morning and bought some bread and cheese. It is not much, but I thought you might be hungry." They shared the simple breakfast, talking as they ate. Preston told her more about his life, about growing up on a small ranch in Texas, about the years since his family died when he'd worked as a drover, moving cattle along the trails from Texas to various markets in the north and east. He spoke of the loneliness of the trail, the beauty of sleeping under the stars, the satisfaction of honest work. Teresa told him about her own life, about growing up on the Virginia farm, about her parents and her sister. She told him about her love of reading, how she'd spent hours poring over every book she could get her hands on, dreaming of adventure and romance. She told him about the small school where she'd taught for the past 2 years, how she'd loved working with the children, watching their faces light up as they learned something new. "The schoolhouse is still there," she said, "but I do not know if they will keep me on. I have nowhere to live now, no proper address, and a woman alone." She trailed off, not needing to finish the thought. They both knew how precarious a woman's position could be without family or means. "We will figure it out," Preston said, and the way he said we made her heart do a strange little flip in her chest. Over the following days, Preston proved as good as his word. He helped her send a telegram to her parents in Richmond, stayed by her side when she went to speak with the school board about her position, and helped her search for more permanent lodging. The cabin had only been paid through the week, and she needed to find something she could afford on a teacher's salary. The problem was that most landlords were hesitant to rent to a single woman, especially one with no family nearby and no references beyond the word of a traveling cowboy. After 2 days of searching and being turned away, Teresa was beginning to feel desperate. "There has to be something," Preston said as they walked back toward the cabin after yet another rejection. His frustration on her behalf was evident in the set of his jaw and the tension in his shoulders. "Maybe I should just wait for my parents to return from Richmond," Teresa said, though the thought of imposing on them, of being a burden, made her chest tight with anxiety. "They could help me find something. When do you expect them back?" "Another 2 weeks, possibly 3. My sister is expecting her first child, and my mother wanted to be there for the birth." Preston was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then he said, "What if we told people we were engaged?" Teresa stopped walking, turning to stare at him. "What?" He held up his hands. "I know how it sounds. But think about it. If people believed you were betrothed, that you had a man to vouch for you and provide for you, they would be more willing to rent to you. And I would be there to sign the papers, to ensure they knew you were not alone." "That is lying," Teresa said, though she couldn't deny the appeal of the plan. "It is a small deception for a good purpose," Preston countered. "Once you are settled, once your parents return and things are more stable, we can quietly end the engagement, no harm done." Teresa studied his face, looking for any sign that he had ulterior motives, but she saw only genuine desire to help. Still, she hesitated. "Why would you do this? You have already done so much. This is beyond because I want to," he interrupted gently. "Because I have been alone for 5 years, and these past few days, helping you, talking with you, I have felt less alone than I have in a very long time. Because—" He paused, seeming to struggle with his words. "Because I care what happens to you, Teresa. I know we have only just met, but I care." Her heart was pounding now, her breath coming a little too fast. "I care too," she admitted. "But Preston, we hardly know each other." "Then we will get to know each other," he said. "We will take our time, there is no rush, but in the meantime let us use this plan to secure you a proper home." Against her better judgment, Teresa agreed. The next day, they presented themselves to a landlady who had a small house for rent on the outskirts of town. When they introduced themselves as an engaged couple, the woman's demeanor immediately changed from suspicious to welcoming. She showed them the house, a modest 2-bedroom structure with a small kitchen and sitting room, and quoted them a price that was reasonable. Preston signed the lease, paid the first month's rent, and just like that, Teresa had a home. Over the following week, they settled into a strange but comfortable routine. Preston slept in the second bedroom, insisting on propriety despite their fake engagement. During the day, he found work at a local stable, mucking stalls and tending horses, while Teresa prepared for the start of the new school term. In the evenings, they cooked simple meals together and talked for hours by the fireplace. The more time Teresa spent with Preston, the more she found herself drawn to him. He was kind and patient, quick to laugh and slow to anger. He listened when she spoke, really listened as though her words mattered to him. He was respectful, never presuming or pushing, always maintaining appropriate boundaries. But there were moments of brush of hands as they reached for the same dish, a lingering glance across the dinner table, the way her breath caught when he smiled at her that made her wonder if their fake engagement might be transforming into something real. On the 8th day after they'd moved into the house, Teresa's parents arrived. They'd received her telegram and immediately cut short their visit to Richmond, arriving in Williamsburg in a flurry of anxiety and relief. Her mother, Margaret Sullivan, swept Teresa into a fierce embrace the moment she arrived, tears streaming down her face. "We were so worried," Margaret sobbed. "When we got your telegram about the fire, we could not get here fast enough." Her father, Robert Sullivan, was more reserved but no less concerned. He held her tight, then stepped back to look her over as though checking for injuries. "Are you all right, daughter? Truly?" "I am fine, Papa," Teresa assured him. "I was not hurt. I am just grateful you were not there when it happened." It was only then that her parents seemed to notice Preston, who had been standing quietly by the fireplace, giving them space for their reunion. "Mama, Papa," Teresa said, "this is Preston Garrett. He is the man I mentioned in my telegram. He found me on the road during the storm and has been helping me get settled." "Mr. Garrett," Robert said, crossing the room to shake Preston's hand, "I cannot thank you enough for what you did for my daughter." "If you had not come along," his voice broke, and he had to clear his throat before continuing. "You have our eternal gratitude." "I was glad I could help, sir," Preston said respectfully. Margaret had joined them, looking between Teresa and Preston with the sharp, assessing gaze that mothers have perfected over generations. "You are staying here, in this house?" Teresa felt her cheeks flush. "It is not what you think, Mama." "We are," she hesitated, suddenly uncertain how to explain the fake engagement. "We are betrothed," Preston finished smoothly. "I know it is sudden, Mr. and Mrs. Sullivan, and we should have sought your permission before making any promises, but the circumstances were unusual. I hope you will forgive the impropriety." Teresa's eyes widened, her heart beginning to race. What was he doing? Her parents had not been part of the plan. They were supposed to quietly end the fake engagement, not extend the lie to her family. Her parents looked stunned. Margaret's hand flew to her mouth and Robert's eyebrows shot up toward his hairline. "Engaged," Margaret repeated, "but you have only known each other a week." "Sometimes that is all it takes," Preston said, and he looked at Teresa with such warmth, such apparent affection, that for a moment she almost believed it herself. "I know it is fast, sir, madam, but when I met your daughter, when I saw her strength and courage despite everything she had been through, I knew I wanted to be part of her life. If you will permit it." There was a long, heavy silence. Teresa held her breath, waiting for her parents to see through the deception, to demand the truth. But then her father said, "You seem like a good man, Mr. Garrett, and you have already proven your character by helping Teresa when she needed it most. But I need to know your intentions are honorable. I need to know you can provide for her." "I understand, sir," Preston said. "I have work at the stable here in town, and I have savings from my years as a drover. I am not a wealthy man, but I am a hard worker, and I will always provide for Teresa and protect her. You have my word on that." Robert studied Preston for a long moment, then slowly nodded. "Then you have my blessing, but I expect a proper wedding with time for Teresa's family to be present." "Of course, sir. Whatever Teresa wants." Margaret was crying again, but these were happy tears now. She pulled Teresa into another embrace, whispering, "Oh, my darling, I am so happy for you. He seems like a wonderful man." Teresa felt like the ground was shifting beneath her feet. This had all spiraled so far beyond what she'd expected. She caught Preston's eye over her mother's shoulder, trying to convey her confusion and concern, but he just gave her a small, reassuring smile. After her parents left, having insisted on staying at the inn in town to give the engaged couple their privacy, Teresa rounded on Preston. "What were you thinking?" she demanded. "My parents were not supposed to be part of this. We were supposed to end the fake engagement quietly, remember?" "I know," Preston said, running a hand through his hair. "I am sorry. I did not plan to do that. But when your father asked if I could provide for you, when your mother looked so worried about your reputation, I just—" He trailed off, seeming frustrated with himself. "I could not let them think poorly of either of us, and I thought it would be easier this way." "Easier?" Teresa's voice rose. "Preston, we will have to keep up this lie indefinitely now. My parents will expect a wedding. What are we supposed to do? We could actually get married." The words hung in the air between them. Teresa stared at him, sure she'd misheard. "What?" Preston stepped closer, his expression serious. "We could get married, for real." "I know it is fast. I know we have only known each other a short time, but Teresa, these past few days with you have been the happiest I have had in years. I meant what I said to your father. When I saw you on that road, when I got to know you, something changed for me. I care about you. I think I could even—" He stopped, seeming to reconsider his words. "I think we could have a good life together, if you were willing." Teresa's mind was reeling. She moved to the window, looking out at the darkening sky, trying to organize her thoughts. What he was suggesting was madness. They barely knew each other. Marriage was a serious commitment, not something to be entered into lightly. And yet, she could not deny the way her heart lifted when Preston walked into a room. She could not deny how right it felt to cook dinner with him, to sit by the fire and talk, to imagine a future that included his steady presence. She could not deny that she had already been dreading the day when their arrangement would end and he would leave to return to Texas. "I do not know," she said finally, honestly. "Preston, I care about you too, but marriage, that is forever. What if we are wrong? What if this feeling is just gratitude on my part or loneliness on yours? What if we wake up in a year and realize we made a terrible mistake?" He came to stand beside her at the window. "Those are all valid concerns," he said quietly. "And I cannot promise we will never have doubts or difficulties, but I can promise that I will work every day to be a good husband to you. I can promise that I will respect you and support you and never take you for granted. And I can promise that this is not just loneliness talking. What I feel for you is real." She turned to look at him, searching his face. "How can you be so sure?" "Because I have been lonely for 5 years," he said. "I have met countless people in that time, and none of them made me want to stop traveling, to put down roots, to build a life in one place. Until you make me want to stay, Teresa. You make me want to see every sunrise, knowing you will be there to see it with me." Teresa felt tears prick her eyes. "This is happening so fast, I know, and if you need time, I will give you time. We can wait. We can extend the fake engagement for as long as you need to be sure." She thought about that, about continuing as they had been, living together but not really together, keeping up a pretense for the world while privately remaining uncertain. She thought about watching him leave eventually, going back to Texas, or wherever the road took him next. She thought about being alone again. "I do not want you to leave," she whispered. "Then I will not leave," he said. "Every sunrise is ours together, Teresa, if you will have me." She looked up at him, at his honest face and his warm eyes and the hope written plainly in his expression, and she made her decision. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you, for real." The smile that broke across his face was like sunshine after a storm. He reached for her hands, holding them gently in his own. "You will not regret this," he promised. "I will spend the rest of my life making sure you do not regret this." Then, slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to, he leaned down and kissed her. It was soft and sweet and full of promise, and Teresa felt something inside her chest unfurl like a flower opening to the sun. When they pulled apart, both of them were smiling. "We should tell your parents," Preston said, "that it is real, that we truly want this." Teresa nodded, still feeling a bit dazed from the kiss and the speed of everything that was happening. "In the morning, tonight, I just want it to be us." They spent the evening much as they had spent the previous evenings, cooking dinner together and sitting by the fire. But now there was a new awareness between them, a current of excitement and anticipation. They held hands on the sofa, and Preston put his arm around her shoulders, and it felt natural and right. "Tell me about Texas," Teresa said. "If we are going to be married, I want to know about the place that made you who you are." Preston's face softened with memory. "It is beautiful," he said. "Big sky country, wide open spaces. The ranch where I grew up was modest, but my father ran it well. I remember helping with the cattle, learning to rope and ride. My sister used to follow me around, always wanting to do whatever I was doing." His voice caught slightly, grief still evident even after 5 years. "She was only 14 when the cholera came. Too young." Teresa squeezed his hand. "I am so sorry. Thank you. It gets easier, but you never really stop missing them." He was quiet for a moment, then continued. "After they died, I could not stay at the ranch, too many memories. I sold it and started working the cattle trails. I thought if I kept moving, I could outrun the grief." "But you cannot outrun grief. You can only learn to carry it." "And now," Teresa asked softly, "now I am ready to stop running, ready to build something new, with you." They talked late into the night, sharing more stories, learning each other's likes and dislikes, their hopes and fears. Teresa told him about her love of books, her dream of maybe one day writing her own stories. Preston told her about his skill with horses, how he'd always had a way with them, how he thought he might like to open his own stable someday. "You could do that here," Teresa said. "In Williamsburg. There is always need for good horse handlers." "Is that something you would want?" Preston asked. "To stay here," Teresa considered. "My family is here, my work is here. But I would be willing to go to Texas if that is what you wanted, if that is where you feel you belong." Preston pulled her closer. "I belong wherever you are," he said simply. "If you want to stay in Virginia, then we will stay. I can make a home anywhere as long as you are in it." When they finally retired to their separate bedrooms, Teresa lay awake for a long time, her mind racing with everything that had happened. She was engaged, truly engaged, to a man she'd known for less than 2 weeks. By all conventional wisdom, this should feel terrifying, reckless, foolish. But it did not feel any of those things. It felt right. She thought about Preston's words, about every sunrise being theirs together, and she smiled into the darkness. The next morning, they went to the inn to speak with her parents. Robert and Margaret were having breakfast when Teresa and Preston arrived, and they immediately invited the couple to join them. "We want to tell you something," Teresa began, glancing at Preston for support. "About our engagement." Her parents exchanged worried looks. "What is it?" Margaret asked. "When Preston told you yesterday that we were betrothed, it was not exactly the truth," Teresa said. "We had been pretending to be engaged just to help me secure housing and work. We were planning to end the fake engagement eventually." Her father's face darkened. "I see." "But," Preston interjected quickly, "what started as a practical arrangement has become real. We are truly engaged now, and we truly want to marry. I know the timeline is unconventional, sir, but my feelings for your daughter are genuine." "As are mine for him," Teresa added. "I know it is fast, and I know you must have concerns." But Papa, Mama, I have never been more certain of anything. He is a good man and I love him." It was the first time she'd said the words out loud, and from the way Preston's head snapped around to look at her, the first time he'd heard them too. She met his gaze and said it again, just to him. "I love you." "I love you too," he said, his voice rough with emotion. Margaret was crying again, dabbing at her eyes with her napkin. Robert still looked concerned, but his expression had softened somewhat. "I appreciate your honesty," Robert said finally. "And I can see that you care for each other, but marriage is not just about feelings. It is about commitment, about partnership, about being able to weather difficulties together. Are you both prepared for that?" "Yes, sir," Preston said without hesitation. "I know I have not proven myself to you yet beyond helping Teresa in a crisis. But I hope you will give me the chance to prove that I will be a good husband to her. Let us have a proper courtship period, a few months where you can see how we are together. If at the end of that time you still have concerns, we will listen to them." Robert considered this, then nodded slowly. "That seems reasonable. Margaret, I think they are in love," Margaret said, smiling through her tears. "I can see it in the way they look at each other, and after everything Teresa has been through, she deserves to be happy." She reached across the table to take Teresa's hand. "If this man makes you happy, daughter, then you have my blessing." "He does, Mama," Teresa said, tears of her own threatening now. "He truly does." The next few months passed in a blur of happiness and activity. With her parents' blessing secured, Teresa and Preston settled into a proper courtship. He continued working at the stable, saving money and building a reputation as an excellent horseman. She resumed her position at the school, teaching children from all over Williamsburg and the surrounding farms. In the evenings, Preston would finish at the stable and come to walk Teresa home from the schoolhouse. They would stroll through town together, hand in hand, stopping to talk with neighbors or browse the shops. On Sundays, they would attend church with her parents, then have dinner together as a family. As the weeks went by, Teresa's parents grew more and more comfortable with Preston. Robert appreciated his strong work ethic and his respectful manner. Margaret loved the way he looked at Teresa, the way he was always finding small ways to make her smile. He brought her wildflowers he'd picked on his ride into work, or saved particularly interesting passages from the newspaper to discuss with her because he knew she loved a good debate. The town had accepted their engagement readily, seeing them as a romantic story, the cowboy and the woman he'd rescued and fallen in love with. The landlady who'd rented them, the house often stopped by with extra food, claiming she'd cooked too much but clearly just wanting to check on the young couple. The stable owner where Preston worked had taken a liking to him and was talking about making him a partner in the business. The school board approved of Teresa's situation now that she was respectably engaged with a wedding date set. That wedding date was approaching now. They'd chosen December 15th, 1883, giving them 3 months to prepare and allowing her parents time to see that Preston and Teresa were truly suited for each other. As autumn turned to winter, as the leaves fell from the trees and the air grew crisp and cold, Teresa and Preston grew closer and closer. They talked about everything, their conversations ranging from the mundane details of daily life to deep philosophical discussions about purpose and meaning. They discovered shared interests, a love of music, an appreciation for the simple pleasures of a well-cooked meal, a tendency to see the humor in life's small absurdities. They also discovered differences, but these seemed to complement rather than conflict. Preston was quieter, more reserved, while Teresa was more expressive and social. He was practical and grounded while she was imaginative and idealistic. Where one was weak, the other was strong, and they found balance in each other, There were kisses, sweet stolen moments on the porch after her parents had retired for the evening, or during walks in the woods outside of town. But Preston was always respectful of propriety, never pushing for more than Teresa was ready to give. There would be time for everything after the wedding, he reminded her gently when she melted into his arms a bit too enthusiastically. They had the rest of their lives. One evening in late November, about 2 weeks before the wedding, Preston came home from the stable looking troubled. Teresa immediately noticed the tension in his shoulders, the worried set of his mouth. "What is wrong?" she asked, setting aside the dress she'd been hemming. Her wedding dress, a simple but beautiful creation of ivory silk that her mother had helped her sew. Preston sat down heavily on the sofa, running his hands through his hair. "There is something I need to tell you, something about my past." Teresa felt a flicker of concern, but she kept her voice steady. "All right, whatever it is, you can tell me." He looked up at her, his expression pained. "I told you that I sold my family's ranch in Texas after they died. What I did not tell you was why I have been traveling ever since, why I never settled anywhere. You said you were running from grief. That is part of it, but not all of it." He took a deep breath. "There was a woman back in Texas. Her name was Anne. We were supposed to be married." Teresa felt her stomach drop, but she forced herself to remain calm. "What happened?" "She broke off the engagement a month after my family died. She said she could not marry a man with no prospects, no land, no money. She married a banker instead, someone who could provide her with the life she wanted." "Oh, Preston," Teresa breathed, understanding flooding through her. "I was devastated," he continued. "Not just because I lost her, but because I realized she had never really loved me. She loved what I represented, the ranch, the stability. When that was gone, I was not enough." He looked at her directly, his eyes intense. "I need you to know, Teresa, that you are not a replacement for her. What I feel for you is nothing like what I felt for Anne. This is real, you are real, and I am not the same man I was then." Teresa crossed to sit beside him, taking his hands in hers. "I know that. I have never doubted your feelings for me." "You should know all of it," Preston said. "You should know that I have been broken and put back together, that I have scars. We all have scars," Teresa said softly. "That does not make us less worthy of love, it makes us human." He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "I do not deserve you." "Yes, you do," she said firmly. "Just as I deserve you. We deserve each other, Preston. We deserve happiness. Do not let the ghosts of the past take that away from us." He pulled back to look at her face. "You are sure? You still want to marry me knowing all of this?" "More sure than ever," she said. "Your past made you who you are, and I love who you are. All of you, including the broken parts and the healed parts and the parts still healing." He kissed her then, deep and passionate, pouring all his relief and gratitude and love into it. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he pressed his forehead to hers. "Every sunrise," he whispered. "I will wake up grateful for every sunrise with you." The wedding was small but beautiful, held in the town church with Teresa's family and a handful of close friends in attendance. Teresa wore her ivory silk dress with her mother's locket around her neck and wildflowers in her hair. Preston wore a new suit, black and well-fitted, and when he saw Teresa walking down the aisle on her father's arm, his eyes filled with tears. The ceremony itself was a blur for Teresa. She remembered the warmth of Preston's hands as they exchanged vows, the steadiness of his voice as he promised to love and cherish her for the rest of his days, the feeling of absolute rightness that washed over her when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife. "You may kiss your bride," the preacher said, and Preston did, sweetly and thoroughly, to the applause and laughter of their small gathering. The celebration afterward was simple but joyful. Margaret had prepared a feast with help from several townswomen who'd grown fond of the couple. There was roasted chicken and fresh bread, apple pie and spice cake, cider and wine. People toasted the newlyweds, sharing stories and well wishes. Robert gave a speech about how proud he was of his daughter and how glad he was that she'd found such a good man. Margaret cried happily throughout the entire celebration. As the evening wore on and the guests began to depart, Preston and Teresa finally found themselves alone in their house, truly theirs now, not just a temporary arrangement or a fake engagement. Teresa felt suddenly nervous, standing in the sitting room while Preston locked the door behind the last departing guest. She twisted her hands together, then forced herself to stop when she realized what she was doing. Preston turned to her and she saw that he looked nervous too, which somehow made her feel better. "Hello, wife," he said softly. "Hello, husband," she replied, and they both smiled at the newness of the words. He crossed to her, taking her hands in his. "We do not have to rush anything," he said. "We have all the time in the world." "I know," she said. "But I am ready. I want this. I want you." He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing gently across her cheeks. "I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of that." "You already are," she whispered. And then she rose on her toes to kiss him. What followed was tender and sweet and occasionally fumbling as they learned each other in this new way. Preston was patient and attentive, making sure Teresa was comfortable, checking in with her, making her laugh when nerves threatened to overwhelm. And when they finally came together completely, when they became truly one, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. Afterward, they lay tangled together in their bed, the sheets pooled around them, Preston's arms wrapped securely around Teresa. "I love you," she murmured against his chest. "So much." "I love you too," he said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "My wife. My Teresa." She smiled, feeling content and happy and deeply, perfectly at peace. This was where she belonged. This was home. The winter passed in a haze of newlywed happiness. Preston continued working at the stable, and in January, the owner, Mr. Harold Crawford, officially made him a partner in the business. It was a generous offer, one that spoke to how much Harold valued Preston's skill and work ethic. Preston accepted gratefully, seeing it as a sign that they truly were building a life here, putting down roots. Teresa continued teaching, and she found that marriage only enhanced her work. The children adored hearing about Mr. Garrett, as they called him, and Preston would sometimes stop by the school to help with particularly difficult students or to demonstrate proper horse care, much to the children's delight. At home, they settled into comfortable routines. Preston would wake early and start the fire, then bring Teresa tea in bed. She would make breakfast while he tended to their small garden, even in winter, preparing the soil for spring planting. They would eat together, talk about their plans for the day, then head off to their respective work. In the evenings, they would reunite, sharing a meal and the details of their day before spending quiet hours reading or talking by the fire. On Sundays, they would visit Teresa's parents, who had decided to remain in Williamsburg rather than returning to rebuild on the site of the burned farm. Robert had found work managing a general store in town, and Margaret kept busy with church activities and visiting with Teresa. Life was good, simple and steady and full of small joys. In March, Teresa began to suspect she might be pregnant. She waited a few weeks, wanting to be certain before she told Preston. When she finally could not deny it any longer, she planned a special evening. She cooked all of Preston's favorite foods, set the table with candles, and wore the blue dress he loved. When he came home from the stable, dirty and tired as usual, he stopped short at the sight of the carefully prepared meal. "What is this?" he asked, smiling. Did I forget an important date? No, Teresa said, unable to keep the grin off her face. I just wanted to do something special. Come, sit. Let me serve you. They ate, talking about their days, Preston describing a particularly difficult horse he'd been working with, Teresa sharing a funny story about one of her students. When they finished eating, Teresa cleared the plates, then returned to sit across from him at the table. I have something to tell you, she said, her heart racing with excitement and nerves. Preston immediately looked concerned. Is everything all right? Everything is wonderful, she assured him. More than wonderful. Preston, I am with child. We are going to have a baby. For a moment he just stared at her as though the words had not quite registered. Then his face broke into the widest smile she'd ever seen, joy radiating from him. Truly? He asked, his voice choked with emotion. Truly, she confirmed. I spoke with the doctor this morning. He believes the baby will come in late September or early October. Preston was out of his chair in an instant, pulling Teresa into his arms and spinning her around, laughing with pure happiness. When he set her down, he immediately looked worried. I should not have done that. Are you all right? Should you be standing? Teresa laughed, her own eyes filling with happy tears. I am fine. I am pregnant, not fragile. A baby, he said wonderingly, placing his hand gently on her still flat stomach. Our baby. They told her parents the following Sunday. Margaret cried, as she seemed to do at every major life event. Robert clapped Preston on the back and congratulated him, then grew misty-eyed himself when he hugged Teresa. My little girl is going to be a mother, he said, his voice thick. The months that followed were full of preparation and anticipation. Preston insisted on taking over all of Teresa's heavier household tasks, despite her protests that she was perfectly capable. He built a beautiful cradle by hand, spending his evenings after work in the small shed behind their house, carefully sanding and shaping the wood. Margaret helped Teresa sew baby clothes, tiny gowns and blankets and caps. Teresa continued teaching through the spring, though she planned to take leave once the baby arrived. The children were excited about the coming baby, constantly asking questions and bringing small gifts, flowers or interesting rocks or drawings they'd made. As summer arrived and Teresa's belly grew round and prominent, she and Preston would spend evenings sitting on the porch, his hand resting on her stomach, feeling the baby kick and move. What should we name him? Preston asked one evening. Or her? I like Samuel for a boy, Teresa said. After your father. Preston's eyes grew bright with unshed tears. He would have liked that, and for a girl, Rose maybe, or Elizabeth, both beautiful names, we do not have to decide yet. We will know when we meet the baby. In September, on a bright, warm afternoon, Teresa's labor began. Margaret was with her, thank God, because Preston had immediately panicked and needed to be sent outside to pace while the women handled things. The midwife was summoned, and after several hours of hard labor, just as the sun was setting, Teresa delivered a healthy baby boy. When Preston was finally allowed back into the room when the midwife placed the tiny, squirming bundle into his arms, he wept openly. He is perfect, Preston breathed, looking down at his son with absolute wonder. Teresa, he is perfect. Samuel Preston Garrett, Teresa said softly, exhausted but happy. Do you approve? I more than approve, Preston said, leaning down to kiss her forehead. Thank you for him, for this, for everything. Samuel was a good baby, fussy only when hungry or tired, and he quickly became the center of their world. Preston was a natural father, patient and gentle, always eager to help with feedings and diaper changes despite the long hours he still worked at the stable. Teresa found herself falling in love with her husband all over again as she watched him with their son, singing soft lullabies in his Texas drawl, telling Samuel stories, even though the baby was far too young to understand. Her parents were doting grandparents, visiting often, always bringing small gifts or offering to watch Samuel so that Teresa and Preston could have some time alone. The townspeople, too, seemed invested in Samuel's arrival, stopping by with casseroles and baby clothes, cooing over him whenever Teresa brought him into town. Life settled into a new rhythm, busier and more chaotic than before, but filled with even more love. There were sleepless nights and moments of exhaustion, but there were also first smiles and the sound of baby laughter, and the incredible feeling of watching their son grow and develop. One morning, when Samuel was about 3 months old, Teresa woke to find Preston already awake, sitting by the window with Samuel cradled in his arms. The sun was just beginning to rise, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. "Another sunrise," Preston said softly when he noticed Teresa was awake. "Every morning I wake up and I cannot believe how lucky I am. You, Samuel, this life we have built. Every sunrise is ours together, just as I promised you." Teresa climbed out of bed and went to join them by the window, wrapping her arms around Preston from behind, looking down at their sleeping son. "I never imagined I could be this happy," she confessed. "That night when you found me in the storm, I thought I had lost everything. But I had not lost everything. I had just not found you yet." Preston turned his head to kiss her. "You saved me just as much as I saved you that night, maybe more." They stood there together as the sun rose fully, bathing them in golden light, the three of them a family. The years passed quickly, as years do when life is full and happy. Samuel grew from a baby into a curious, energetic toddler, then into a bright young boy who loved horses and books in equal measure, inheriting his father's skill with animals and his mother's love of learning. When Samuel was 2, Teresa became pregnant again. This time, she gave birth to a daughter they named Rose Margaret, after the name Teresa had mentioned years ago and in honor of her mother. Rose was quieter than Samuel had been, more thoughtful with her father's dark hair and her mother's blue eyes. 2 years after Rose came another son, Daniel Robert, named for his maternal grandfather. Daniel was the most outgoing of the three, always laughing, always getting into mischief. The house that had seemed perfectly adequate for 2 became cramped with 5, so Preston built an addition, expanding it to accommodate their growing family. By then, the stable business was thriving, and they had enough money to live comfortably, not wealthy but secure. Teresa had stopped teaching at the school after Rose was born, finding that managing 3 children was more than a full-time job. But she did not miss it as much as she'd expected. She was happy in her role as wife and mother, and she found other outlets for her intellectual energy, writing stories that she shared with her children at bedtime, organizing a women's literary society in town, teaching her own children to read and write before they were old enough for formal schooling. Preston flourished as both a husband and a father. He was patient with the children's endless questions, always willing to stop what he was doing to explain something or help with a problem. He taught Samuel and Daniel to ride almost as soon as they could walk, and he made sure Rose learned too, insisting that girls should know how to handle horses just as well as boys. He was affectionate with Teresa, still bringing her wildflowers after all these years, still making her laugh, still looking at her with love and desire even after the romance of their early days had mellowed into something deeper and steadier. There were challenges, of course. A severe winter in 1889 when money was tight, and they worried about affording enough food and fuel. A bout of scarlet fever that swept through the town and left all 3 children sick, though thankfully all recovered. Disagreements and arguments, inevitable when two people share a life together, though they always worked through them with communication and compromise. Through it all, they held on to each other and to the love that had brought them together that stormy night in 1883. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Preston arranged for Margaret and Robert to watch the children so he could take Teresa on a special outing. He would not tell her where they were going, just instructed her to dress warmly and bring a blanket. They rode together on Dusty, who was older now but still sturdy and reliable, out to a clearing in the woods outside of town. Preston had been there earlier, Teresa realized, because there was a fire already prepared and a basket of food waiting. "What is all this?" she asked, delighted. "I wanted to do something special for our anniversary," Preston said, helping her down from the horse. "I know we cannot go far with the children, but I thought we could at least steal a few hours." They sat by the fire as the sun set, eating the food Preston had packed, cold chicken and cheese and fresh bread, along with a bottle of wine that he'd splurged on from the general store. 10 years, Teresa said, leaning against his shoulder. "Sometimes it feels like just yesterday that you found me on that road. Other times, it feels like we have been together forever." "I know what you mean," Preston said, his arm around her waist. "I cannot really remember what my life was like before you. Or rather, I can remember, but it feels like it happened to someone else, not me." "Do you ever regret staying in Virginia?" Teresa asked. "Do you ever miss Texas?" Preston considered this. "Sometimes I miss the landscape," he admitted. "The wide open spaces, the big sky. But I do not regret staying. How could I regret a life that gave me you and the children? You are my home, Teresa. You and Samuel and Rose and Daniel. Wherever you are, that is where I belong." Teresa turned to kiss him, slow and deep, the kind of kiss that still made her toes curl even after 10 years and 3 children. "I love you," she said when they finally broke apart. "I will love you for all the rest of my days." "And I will love you for all of mine," Preston replied. "Every sunrise, Teresa. Every single sunrise is ours together." They stayed out in the clearing until the stars came out, talking about their past and their dreams for the future. They talked about what they hoped for their children, about possibly expanding the stable business, about growing old together. "I want to meet our grandchildren someday," Teresa said, looking up at the stars. "I want to see what kind of people our children become." "They will be wonderful," Preston said confidently. "How could they not be with you as their mother? And you as their father," Teresa added. When they finally rode back home, they found the children already asleep, sprawled in their grandparents' guest room where Margaret and Robert were watching them for the night. But Preston and Teresa took their time, making love slowly and thoroughly, celebrating a decade of marriage, of partnership, of choosing each other every single day. The years continued to flow by. Samuel grew into a young man who loved working with horses just like his father, and at 18, he became a full partner in the stable business, which had been officially renamed Garrett and Son Stables. Rose developed a passion for teaching, and at 16, she began helping at the local school, mentoring younger children in reading and arithmetic. Daniel, the youngest, was still finding his path, but he showed promise as an artist, constantly sketching the horses and landscapes around him. Teresa's parents aged gracefully, eventually retiring from their work but remaining active and involved in their grandchildren's lives. Robert taught the boys to fish and took them on camping trips. Margaret taught Rose to sew and shared family recipes, ensuring that traditions would be passed down. Preston and Teresa themselves were growing older, lines appearing around their eyes and gray threading through their hair. Preston's hands, after years of hard work, bore the marks of his labor, calluses, and old scars. Teresa's figure had softened with the bearing and raising of 3 children. But they were happy, deeply and contentedly happy. On a morning in the spring of 1900, Teresa woke to find Preston already up, standing by the window as he had so many times over the years, watching the sunrise. She joined him, sliding her arms around his waist, resting her head against his back. "Another sunrise," she said softly, echoing words that had become a sort of ritual between them over the years. "Another sunrise, another day with you," Preston replied, turning to pull her into his arms. "Do you know what I was just thinking about?" "What?" "That night in the storm when I found you. How different my life would be if I had taken a different road that day, if I had passed through a day earlier or a day later. I would have missed you entirely." "Fate," Teresa said. "I like to think we were meant to find each other." "Perhaps," Preston agreed, "or perhaps we just got very, very lucky." "I do not believe in luck like that," Teresa said. "I believe we were given a chance and we chose to take it. We chose each other and we chose to keep choosing each other every day since." Preston kissed the top of her head. "Wisest decision I ever made." They stood there for a while longer, watching the sun climb higher in the sky, bathing the world in golden light. From down the hall, they heard the sounds of their children beginning to stir, starting another day. "I suppose we should start breakfast," Teresa said, though she made no move to leave Preston's embrace. "In a minute," Preston said. "Let me just hold you a little longer." And so they stood there, husband and wife, watching the sunrise as they had done countless times before, and would do countless times again, grateful for the storm that had brought them together, for the love that had sustained them, for the life they had built together from nothing but hope and determination, and the willingness to take a chance on each other. As the sun rose higher and the day truly began, as their children's voices grew louder and the demands of daily life reasserted themselves, Preston whispered against Teresa's hair, "Every sunrise is ours together, my love. Always." "Always." Teresa agreed, and they went to face the day, hand in hand, as they had faced every day for the past 17 years, and as they would face every day to come together. Years continued their steady march forward, bringing with them the inevitable changes that time always brings. Samuel married a lovely young woman named Catherine, the daughter of a merchant from Richmond, and they gave Preston and Teresa their first grandchild in 1902, a boy they named Preston after his grandfather. The joy Preston felt holding his namesake, seeing in the baby's face echoes of his own son and his own father, was almost overwhelming. Rose eventually married as well, to a teacher from the school where she had been working, a kind and intelligent man named William who shared her passion for education. They settled in Williamsburg, and Rose continued teaching even after marriage, breaking with tradition in a way that made Teresa proud. Rose and William had 2 daughters in quick succession, twin girls they named Emma and Alina. Daniel, true to his artistic nature, chose a different path. At 19, he left Williamsburg to study art in Richmond, then later in Boston. He would return home for visits, regaling the family with stories of city life and showing them his latest paintings. He eventually found success as a portrait artist, though he never married, claiming his art was his true love. Through all these changes, Preston and Teresa remained the steady center of their growing family. The house that Preston had expanded over the years now hosted regular Sunday dinners where children and grandchildren would gather, filling the rooms with noise and laughter. Teresa would cook enormous meals with help from Rose and Catherine, while Preston and Samuel and William would entertain the grandchildren, teaching them to whittle or identify different types of wood, or simply chasing them around the yard. Margaret Sullivan passed away peacefully in her sleep in 1903, and Robert followed her only 6 months later, dying of what the doctor said was a broken heart, but what the family knew was simply the grief of losing his beloved wife of 45 years. Teresa mourned her parents deeply, but she found comfort in knowing they had lived full lives and had been surrounded by love until the very end. She found comfort, too, in Preston's steady presence, his strong arms holding her through her grief just as she had held him through his own losses years before. The stable business continued to thrive under the partnership of Preston and Samuel. They had expanded over the years, now offering not just boarding and care but also horse training and even a small breeding program. The Garrett name had become synonymous with quality and fair dealing in Williamsburg and the surrounding area. Teresa, now a grandmother multiple times over, found new purpose in helping care for her grandchildren while their parents worked. She told them stories, the same ones she had told their parents, and new ones she made up on the spot. She taught them to read, just as she had taught their parents. She passed down recipes and skills and family history, ensuring that the next generation would know where they came from. On their 25th wedding anniversary, the entire family gathered for a celebration. Samuel and Catherine were there with young Preston and their new daughter, Sarah. Rose and William brought the twins, now rambunctious 5-year-olds. Daniel made the trip from Boston, bringing with him a portrait he had painted of Preston and Teresa from a photograph taken on their wedding day. When Daniel unveiled the portrait, Teresa gasped. He had captured them perfectly, the joy and hope and love in their young faces, the way they had looked at each other as though the other was the most precious thing in the world. "It is beautiful," Teresa said, tears streaming down her face. "Daniel, it is absolutely beautiful." "You two are my inspiration," Daniel said, hugging his mother. "The love you have shown each other, the family you have built, it is everything I try to capture in my art, the beauty of real, lasting love." Preston stood beside Teresa, looking at the portrait of his younger self, remembering that day, that feeling of starting a new life with the woman he loved. 25 years, he said wonderingly. "It has gone so fast. And we have 25 more ahead of us," Teresa said firmly. "At least." That night, after all the family had gone home and the house was quiet again, Preston and Teresa sat on their porch, wrapped in blankets against the cool evening air. They had done this countless times over the years, sitting together in companionable silence, watching the stars come out. "Do you remember what you said to me that first night?" Teresa asked. "When I thought you would leave at dawn." "I said every sunrise is ours together," Preston replied, "and I meant it. I have meant it every day since." "You have never broken that promise," Teresa said. "Not once in 25 years have I woken up without you beside me." "And you never will," Preston said, pulling her closer. "Not if I have anything to say about it." They sat there until the stars were bright overhead, until the spring night grew too cold even for blankets. And then they went inside together, to the bed they had shared for a quarter-century, to sleep wrapped in each other's arms as they had done thousands of times before. The next decade brought both joys and sorrows, as life always does. More grandchildren were born, until Preston and Teresa had 8 in total, each one a new wonder, a new blessing. Samuel took over the majority of the stable business as Preston gradually retired, though he still came by most days to help with the horses and offer advice. Teresa's health began to decline in her early 60s, a persistent cough that the doctor could not seem to cure. Preston worried constantly, hovering over her, making her rest even when she insisted she was fine. But as the months passed, Teresa grew weaker, the cough grew worse, and they both knew that their time together was growing shorter. On a spring morning in 1913, 30 years after they had married, Teresa woke to find Preston beside her in bed, watching her with such love and such sorrow in his eyes that she knew he was thinking about losing her. "Not yet," she said, reaching up to touch his face. "I am not leaving you yet." "I know," he said, but his voice cracked. "I am not ready. I will never be ready." "No one ever is," Teresa said gently. "But Preston, listen to me. We have had 30 beautiful years together. 3 children, 8 grandchildren, a life full of love and happiness. Not everyone gets that. We have been blessed beyond measure." "I want more time," Preston said, and now he was crying, tears streaming down his weathered face. "I want another 30 years. I want 50. I want forever." "You will have forever," Teresa said, "just maybe not in the way we hoped." "But love does not end, Preston, not real love. I will always be with you in your heart, in our children, in everything we built together." "I cannot lose you," he whispered. "You will never lose me," she promised. "Every sunrise, remember. Every sunrise is ours together, whether I am physically here or not. When you watch the sun rise, I will be there with you. Always." Teresa lived for another 2 months, growing progressively weaker but remaining mentally sharp until the very end. The family took turns staying with her, saying their goodbyes, sharing memories. But Preston never left her side, sleeping in a chair next to the bed, holding her hand, talking to her even when she was too weak to respond. On a June morning, just as the sun was beginning to rise, Teresa opened her eyes one last time. Preston was there as he had always been, holding her hand. "The sunrise," she whispered. "I see it," Preston said, tears streaming down his face. "It is beautiful." "Our sunrise," Teresa said. "Ours." "Ours," Preston agreed. "Every sunrise, my love, every single one." Teresa smiled, squeezed his hand with what little strength she had left, and closed her eyes. She took one more breath, then another, then no more. Preston sat there for a long time, holding her hand, watching the sun rise fully over Williamsburg, bathing their bedroom in golden light. He felt as though his heart had been ripped from his chest, as though he could not possibly continue without her. But even through the crushing grief, he remembered her words. She would always be with him. Every sunrise would be theirs together. The funeral was well attended, testimony to how many lives Teresa had touched over the years. Former students, now grown with children of their own, came to pay their respects. Neighbors and friends, members of her literary society, people whose lives she had enriched in countless small ways. The church was full to overflowing, and the eulogies spoke of a woman who had been kind and intelligent, loving and strong, a devoted wife and mother and grandmother. After Teresa was laid to rest next to her parents in the Williamsburg cemetery, the family gathered at the house. Preston accepted their condolences mechanically, barely registering the words. It was Samuel who finally pulled him aside. "Papa," his son said gently, "you should rest. You have not slept properly in weeks." "I cannot," Preston said. "If I sleep, if I close my eyes, I see her everywhere. I hear her voice, and then I wake up and remember she is gone, and I have to feel that loss all over again." "I know," Samuel said, his own eyes red from crying. "But you cannot go on like this. Mama would not want you to destroy yourself with grief." "Your mother was my whole world," Preston said, his voice breaking. "How am I supposed to go on without her?" Samuel put his arms around his father, and Preston, who had always been the strong one, the protector, broke down completely, sobbing against his son's shoulder. The days after Teresa's death were the darkest of Preston's life. He went through the motions of living, getting up, eating when forced to, going to the stable, but he felt hollow, empty. The house felt too big and too quiet without Teresa's presence. He would catch himself turning to tell her something, only to remember she was not there. He would wake in the night reaching for her and finding only cold sheets. But slowly, painfully, he began to heal. Not to forget, never to forget, but to carry his grief rather than be buried by it. He spent time with his children and grandchildren, finding comfort in the pieces of Teresa he saw in them. Rose had her mother's love of learning. Samuel had her kindness. Daniel had her creative spirit. And all the grandchildren carried some part of her in their faces, their mannerisms, their personalities. And every morning Preston woke before dawn and went to the window to watch the sunrise. Sometimes he cried. Sometimes he smiled, remembering a happy moment. But always, he felt Teresa there with him, keeping her promise, sharing every sunrise just as they had promised each other so many years ago. Preston lived for another 10 years after Teresa's death, long enough to see all of his grandchildren grow up, long enough to meet his first great-grandchild, long enough to pass the stable business entirely to Samuel, and to see it continue to thrive. He spent his final years surrounded by family, telling stories about Teresa, keeping her memory alive for the younger generations who had never known her or barely remembered her. On a spring morning in 1923, 40 years after he had found Teresa on that storm-swept road, Preston woke early as he always did. He felt different somehow, lighter, as though a weight he had been carrying had suddenly been lifted. He went to the window to watch the sunrise, something he had done every single day since Teresa's death. But this time, as the sun crested the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of pink and gold, he felt her presence more strongly than he had in years. It was as though she was standing right beside him, her hand in his, watching the sunrise together just as they had done so many times before. "Teresa," he whispered into the golden light, and he could have sworn he heard her voice, clear as a bell, answering him. "I am here, my love." "I have always been here." Preston smiled, feeling a peace settle over him that he had not felt since the day she died. "Every sunrise," he said softly. "Every sunrise is ours together," came her voice again, so real he could almost feel her breath against his ear. Samuel found his father an hour later, still standing by the window, the sunrise fully risen now and flooding the room with light. Preston had passed peacefully, a smile on his weathered face, his gaze fixed on the horizon. At the funeral, Samuel stood before the assembled family and friends and told them about his father's mourning ritual, how he had watched every sunrise for 10 years, never missing a single one, keeping his promise to his beloved wife. He told them that his father had finally joined his mother, and that somewhere, in whatever came after this life, they were together again, watching the sunrise as they had always done. The family buried Preston next to Teresa, their graves side by side, their headstones simple but elegant, bearing their names and the dates of their births and deaths, and beneath, an inscription that Samuel had chosen. "Every sunrise is ours together." Years passed as they always do. The children grew old themselves, became grandparents, then great-grandparents. The stable business was eventually sold to new owners, though it kept the Garrett name out of respect for the family that had built it. The house where Preston and Teresa had raised their family was passed down through the generations, carefully maintained, treasured. And on spring mornings, when the light was just right, when the sunrise painted the Virginia sky in shades of pink and gold, the descendants of Preston and Teresa would sometimes pause to watch, remembering the love story that had started their family. The cowboy who had refused to leave at dawn, who had promised that every sunrise would be theirs together, and who had kept that promise every single day of his life and beyond. Their story became part of the family legend, told and retold to each new generation, a reminder that true love exists, that it can grow from the most unlikely beginnings, that it can sustain through hardship and loss, and that it never truly ends. As long as someone remembered, as long as someone told the story, Preston and Teresa lived on, their love eternal, unbreakable, constant as the sunrise itself. And every spring morning when the light was just right, it was easy to believe that somewhere in some dimension beyond mortal understanding, they were still together, still holding hands, still watching the sunrise, fulfilled at last in the promise that had sustained them through life and beyond it. Every sunrise is ours together, now and forever, without end.